It started with a phone call. Curtis Rafford adjusted the thermostat in his small apartment, frowning at the weak air that sputtered from the vents. At 92, his bones felt the winter chill more deeply than they used to. The heat had been acting up for weeks now, rattling and wheezing through the night, not unlike his own lungs on cold mornings. He checked his bank account one more time, knowing his VA stipend adjustment should arrive today. Just a few $100s, not much to most, but enough to fix the heat before the real cold set in. The screen showed the same balance as yesterday. Nothing had changed. Curtis straightened his navy blue cap, the one with U.S. Bellewood 1952 embroidered in gold thread. 30 years of service. 3 decades given to his country. He'd seen things most couldn't imagine. Pulled friends from burning wreckage, crawled through rice paddies under fire, faced death with nothing but a rusted M16 and steady hands. Now he faced another battle. The silent invisibility of age. The wool of his faded Navy-issue coat, worn threadbare at the elbows, offered little protection against the morning chill as Curtis made his way to Georgia First Bank. 5 blocks of careful steps, each one measured and deliberate. Not out of weakness, out of memory. His body remembered every mile marched, every deck scrubbed, every rescue mission. The bank buzzed with activity, a payday crowd, impatient and glued to their phones. No one offered him a seat. The woman ahead of him, mid-30s in crisp business slacks, sighed loud enough for him to hear when he stepped into line. "Why do they even come alone?" she muttered to the man beside her. Every time they slow up the line. Curtis said nothing, fingers tracing the folded VA letter in his pocket. A delayed payment notice for a military pension adjustment. When his turn finally came, the young clerk barely looked up from her screen. Name: Curtis Rafford. I'm here about a direct deposit error. It was supposed to come in this week from the VA. The clerk typed, popped her gum. Nothing's posted yet. Maybe check back next week, sir. Curtis offered her the letter. They said it would be today. She glanced at it for 2 seconds before handing it back. Doesn't matter what the paper says. If it's not in the system, it's not here. From the corner, a security guard chuckled just loud enough. Probably just confused. Poor guy thinks he's still back in. Curtis didn't flinch. He just nodded once, slowly, and stepped aside. From the far end of the lobby, a janitor named Maya watched it all, mop in hand, still as stone. She didn't say a word, not yet. But her eyes followed Curtis as he walked toward the exit and paused before the flag near the door, placing 2 fingers gently to his brow in a silent, forgotten salute. Curtis Rafford sat alone at his kitchen table, a chipped mug of black coffee steaming between his hands. The apartment was small, warm in patches, drafty in others. Paint peeled at the corners of the ceiling, and the fridge hummed with the tired rattle of age, much like the man who owned it. He unfolded the VA letter again, laying it beside a yellow notepad scribbled with budget notes, rent, gas bill, medication refills. The extra stipend he was owed wasn't much by most standards, but to Curtis, it meant a stocked pantry, a new space heater, maybe even new soles for the boots he'd kept since Reagan was in office. The landline rang, a sharp, sudden trill that echoed through the silence. He blinked, then picked up. Mr. Curtis Rafford. The voice on the other end was smooth, professional. A young man with a calm authority. Speaking. This is Devon Clark from Veteran Security Affairs. We're calling because we've noticed a potential issue with your incoming federal benefits transfer. Your account may have been flagged for irregular activity. Curtis's brows furrowed. Flagged. Yes, sir. It's a routine verification call, but if we don't act today, your stipend may be frozen for 60 to 90 days. I can help you now if you're ready to verify your identity. Curtis didn't trust easily. Never had. He'd once slept in muddy trenches for weeks because he didn't trust the safety of an unscouted building. But the voice on the phone had just the right tone, confident, official, respectful, and he had been expecting that deposit. "What do you need from me?" he asked, cautious. "Just a standard two-step verification. We've sent an OTP code to your mobile device. When it arrives, please read it back to me." Curtis glanced at the flip phone resting on the table. It buzzed once. A 6-digit code blinked on screen. He hesitated. The voice coaxed gently. "You're doing great, sir. This ensures no one else can access your account. We protect veterans first." Curtis read the number slowly. 9-226-40-8. There was a pause, a soft, polite confirmation. "Perfect. You're all set, sir. You should see your funds shortly. Thank you again for your service." The line went dead. Curtis stared at the receiver in his hand. Something inside him, a gut feeling honed through decades of danger, stirred uneasily. He turned to his laptop and logged into his online banking portal. It took a moment to load. When the screen refreshed, the numbers hit him like a bullet to the chest. $0. All gone. Every cent. His hand shook. Not from age, from shame, from disbelief, from the cold, hollow realization that he'd been tricked like a child, like a fool. Curtis Rafford, who had faced death with a steady hand, had just been robbed by a voice on a phone. And for the first time in decades, he couldn't tell whether what burned in his eyes was anger or tears. Curtis Rafford didn't sleep that night. He sat in the worn armchair by the window, still in his thermal undershirt and wool socks, the VA letter lying crumpled at his feet. The glow from the street lamp outside flickered through the blinds, casting long shadows on the walls. Shadows that danced with memories of foxholes and flare light, of silence just before a firefight. But tonight there were no gunshots, no alarms, just a silence so heavy it pressed against his chest. At 6:17 am, the radiator coughed again, and Curtis stood slowly, his joints aching in protest. He poured himself another cup of yesterday's coffee, reheated in the microwave until it was just warm enough not to feel like defeat. He logged into his bank account again, still empty, no reversal, no note, not even a red flag. It felt personal. Curtis wasn't rich. He never had been. But there had always been a kind of wealth in his life. Honor, pride, self-reliance. These were currencies no one could take until now. A knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find Mrs. Althea Jacobs, his neighbor from 2C, holding a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "I saw your lights on all night," she said softly. "Figured you could use breakfast." Curtis tried to smile. "Appreciate it, Althea." She handed him the plate, then touched his arm. "You okay?" He wanted to say yes, that he was fine, that everything would work itself out, but the words didn't come. After she left, he sat down again, fork untouched, mind racing. They took more than just money. They took the last bit of trust he had in the world outside these walls. But he wasn't going to sit in that chair forever. By 8 am, he had dressed in his best. Not that he owned much. Slacks pressed, shirt buttoned, jacket zipped to the collar, his navy cap pulled down low. He stepped outside, locking the door behind him with a deliberate turn of the key. The walk to the police station was 5 blocks, every step deliberate, controlled, measured. He passed by a young couple laughing over coffee, a group of teenagers riding bikes, a jogger with earbuds in moving too fast to notice him. No one saw the storm moving beneath his quiet exterior. Inside the precinct, the air smelled of old coffee and stale paperwork. The walls were a dull beige, the kind that made everyone look tired. Curtis stepped to the reception desk. The officer behind the glass didn't even look up. "I need to report a theft," Curtis said, voice steady. The man behind the glass sighed. "Take a number and wait, sir." Curtis looked down at the numbered ticket in his hand. The screen blinked. Now CRV 44. His ticket read 92. He sat down. The same patience that had carried him through ambushes, hunger, and war now carried him through this. but something inside him was shifting. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity. Curtis Rafford waited for nearly an hour, unmoving on the cold plastic bench. The screen above the reception desk ticked slowly toward his number. Other names were called. Other cases filed. But no one looked twice at the old man in the navy coat, his hands folded neatly on his lap. At last, the number blinked. 92. He stood, knees cracking, and approached the desk. Behind it sat a young officer, white, early 30s, in a pressed uniform and a smug grin that barely shifted when Curtis stepped forward. Name? The officer asked, not glancing up from his computer screen. Curtis Rafford. I need to file a report. I was the victim of a scam. They cleaned out my account. The officer, whose nameplate read Myers, tapped a few keys lazily. Scam, huh? What? You give some Nigerian prince your bank info? Curtis didn't answer right away. I got a call, he said evenly. Sounded official. Claimed it was about a delayed VA payment. They had my information. They mentioned the exact amount I was due. Officer Myers finally looked up, his eyes scanning Curtis as if measuring how much time he wanted to waste. Let me guess, you gave them a code or something. Curtis nodded once. The officer leaned back in his chair and laughed, loud, dismissive. Man, you really are something. No offense, but don't you people watch the news? This is like rule number 1. Don't give strangers codes over the phone. Curtis's jaw tightened. I came here to report a crime. And I'm telling you, this ain't a crime. It's a mistake. Your mistake. The officer shook his head. You old folks fall for this stuff every week. Then expect us to fix it. We're not a bank recovery service, Mr. Rafford. You need to call your credit union. A silence stretched between them. Curtis stood tall, his spine straightening. The decades rolled back for a moment. I served 30 years in the Navy, he said quietly. And I buried friends younger than you who died protecting the right for people like you to wear that badge. Officer Myers rolled his eyes. Well, thank you for your service, but we're a little busy with real cases today. From the hallway behind the desk, a second officer walked by. A younger black man in plain clothes. He caught the tail end of the conversation and paused, glancing between Curtis and the desk. Curtis turned to go, but not before Officer Myers muttered. These old guys think the world owes them something just 'cause they wore a uniform once. Times change. Curtis stopped mid-step. He turned slowly, looked the officer dead in the eye. No, he said. The world doesn't owe me anything. But you? You owe this badge a little respect. And with that, he walked out. Past the staring crowd, past the Rain Street glass doors, holding on to one thing stronger than pride: resolve. Curtis Rafford stood at the corner across from the police station, watching cars pass as if they belonged to another world, a faster one, a younger one. The cold nipped at his ears, but he barely felt it. His hands were clenched inside his coat pockets, not from the chill, from something deeper. A burn that came from being made invisible in a place he had once bullied to defend. He turned down Maple Street and walked the 2 blocks home, every step slower than the last. By the time he reached his apartment building, Maya, the janitor from the bank, was sweeping salt off the front steps. She looked up, frowning. Mr. Rafford, you okay? You look different. Curtis hesitated. Had to file a police report. Someone stole my benefit check, cleaned me out. Her broom slowed. Did they help you? He didn't answer. Maya looked at him. Really looked. Not at the frayed sleeves or the outdated cap, but into the quiet storm behind his eyes. Sir, you mind if I take your picture? She asked suddenly. I know that sounds strange, but I think people should hear this. Curtis didn't like the spotlight. Never had. But something about Maya's voice, calm, sure, made him nod. Once, she raised her phone. Can you hold the letter in your hand? He did. She snapped the photo. the silhouette of an old soldier in a worn coat, holding a government-issued envelope under grey skies. That night, Maya posted it online with a short caption. "This is Mr. Curtis Rafford, 92, a Navy veteran who served 3 decades. Lost everything to a scam this weekend, went to the police, was mocked and dismissed. We should do better. We must do better." She tagged the local news, a few veteran support groups, and went to bed thinking it might get a few shares. By morning, it had gone viral. Thousands of comments flooded in. One from a former Marine read, "Curtis Rafford? As in Commander Rafford, I served under him. Man's a legend." Others followed. Old crewmates, former soldiers, retired officers, all chiming in. Stories spilled out like forgotten pages of a history book. "He was the one who pulled my brother out of a downed chopper in '66. Curtis Rafford led the extraction unit during the Saigon collapse. He took shrapnel in the chest and refused evacuation so we could lift off first. By noon, a journalist picked it up. By 2 p.m., news trucks were outside Curtis' apartment. But inside, Curtis sat quietly in his chair, unaware of the digital storm. The internet remembered him before he did, because somewhere along the way, between the medals, the deployments, and the solitude of age, Curtis had forgotten just how many lives he had touched. But the world hadn't. And now it was time they said his name out loud. At 8:15 a.m., an assistant to the White House Chief of Staff opened his email and nearly spilled his coffee. Subject line, "Urgent. National uproar over mishandled veteran case. Curtis Rafford." By 8:30, the press secretary had flagged it. By 9 o'clock, it was in front of the president. The image had already made the rounds, an old black man in a faded Navy cap standing in the rain, holding a VA letter like it was the last piece of dignity he had left. But it wasn't the photo alone that set everything ablaze. It was the comments. Decorated generals, former senators, journalists, thousands of strangers, all echoing the same truth. Curtis Rafford wasn't just a veteran. He was an institution. The president leaned back in his chair, reading the words out loud to his national security advisor. Saved 2 pilots during Operation Rolling Thunder. First black commander of the 3rd Naval Rescue Fleet. Never took promotion over people, always chose integrity. The president's voice turned quiet, and he was mocked in a precinct for being old. A brief silence passed before the president gave the order, "Find him. I want him spoken to today, and I want a full review of every single VA scan report in the past year. If he slipped through, others have too." In Atlanta, Curtis' apartment was surrounded by a growing crowd. News vans lined the curb. A group of local ROTC cadets stood at attention outside his building, refusing to leave until they could meet him. Inside, Curtis sat in his armchair, staring blankly at the television. His name was on the screen. Viral outrage after decorated Navy veteran Curtis Rafford was scammed and dismissed by local authorities. National figures are calling for accountability. In a breaking update, the White House has confirmed a personal response is underway. Curtis didn't move, didn't blink. Then the phone rang. He picked it up slowly. "Mr. Rafford, this is Denise Fowler, Deputy Director of Veterans Affairs. I'm calling at the request of the President." Curtis sat up straighter. "We're deeply sorry for what happened to you, but I want to be clear. You have not been forgotten. The President is aware of your record, and we are launching a multi-agency investigation into the scam you reported and the precinct that failed you." Curtis said nothing for a long moment. Then, with the calm of a man who'd weathered worse storms, he replied, "I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to be heard." "And now," Fowler said, her voice softening, "the whole nation is listening." Outside, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. Inside, a man in uniform, chest adorned with stars and medals, who had once been a young recruit under Commander Rafford. He stepped out into the cold and came to attention. By the time dusk fell, the precinct that once dismissed Curtis Rafford had become a national spotlight. Uniformed officers stood rigid outside the doors, not out of routine but tension. The Atlanta police chief had been summoned from a budget meeting and was now pacing a conference room, watching headlines scroll across a muted television. Decorated war hero mocked, ignored. Federal authorities respond. FBI, DOJ, and VA launched joint investigation into veteran scam ring. But behind the press drama, something darker was unraveling. It began when the FBI traced the scammer's call. Then the second shock came. The phone number had been registered not just to any civilian, but to a burner phone recovered in a past case involving internal corruption within the police force. The name that surfaced in the records, Officer Jason Myers, the same officer who had mocked Curtis to his face. Surveillance review showed him stepping away from his desk at the exact time Curtis arrived. His financials were a mess. Gambling debts, strange wire transfers. The pieces clicked too easily. By 9:00 p.m., Myers was escorted out of the precinct in cuffs. No comment, he mumbled to the press, his face pale under the glare of live cameras. Curtis Rafford watched it all from his apartment, surrounded by Maya, Althea from 2C, and two young cadets who refused to leave his side. His name was now printed beneath a photo of him receiving a saluting gesture from a full colonel outside his building. But it wasn't revenge he felt. It was release. Decades of silence. Decades of shrinking into the corners of rooms out of respect for younger voices finally evaporated into something larger. Curtis had not asked for justice in flames. He had asked for dignity in daylight. And now the world had given it back. As Officer Myers was loaded into the squad car, a reporter asked a final question. "Commander Rafford, do you have anything to say to the man who called you just an old fool?" Curtis turned to the camera, face calm beneath his navy cap. "I've been called worse by better men," he said. "But I've never needed to raise my voice to prove my worth." And with that, he turned back inside. The investigation moved swiftly. What began as a scam report uncovered a web of corruption that reached into the heart of the VA benefits system. Officer Myers wasn't just a bitter cop. He was part of a network targeting elderly veterans, using personal data skimmed from police reports to identify vulnerable marks. The FBI followed the money trail to 3 bank accounts in different states. 5 other officers across 2 precincts were implicated. A VA clerk who had been selling private information for years was arrested the following day. And through it all, Curtis Rafford's name became a rallying cry. #WeRemember Rafford trended for days. Veteran service organizations mobilized. Congress fast-tracked a bill to strengthen protections for elderly veterans and increase penalties for those who targeted them. The president signed an executive order establishing the Rafford Commission, a task force dedicated to reviewing the handling of veteran support programs and eliminating vulnerabilities in the system. But for Curtis, the most meaningful moment came not from the headlines or politics, but from a simple knock on his door. It was the young black officer who had witnessed his dismissal at the precinct. He stood at attention, uniform pressed crisp. "Officer Thomas Wilkins, sir," he said. "I'd wanted to apologize in person. I saw how they treated you, and I did nothing. That failure is on me." Curtis' expression softened. "You're here now." "Yes, sir. And I've been reassigned to head the new Veterans Liaison Office. If you're willing, we'd like your input on how to build it right." Curtis studied the young man's face, determined, honest, a little nervous. He saw something of himself there from decades ago. "Come in, son," he said finally, opening his door wider. "We've got work to do." Curtis Rafford stood still as the final notes of the bugle echoed through the open air. A hush blanketed the crowd. Military officials, news crews, veterans young and old. Some saluted, some wiped away quiet tears. But all eyes were on the man at the center of it all. A marble plaque had just been unveiled. Commander Curtis Rafford, United States Navy, defender, rescuer, legend. Below it, we remember because he never forgot us. It wasn't the money that was returned, or the apology from the mayor, or even the full-page headline in the Washington Post that called him the man who made a nation remember. It was this moment. Respect was not demanded but offered freely. Maya stood nearby, dressed in her best coat, clutching the original VA letter. She smiled gently as the president's military liaison presented Curtis with a new medal, the Presidential Medal for Civil and Military Honor. Not for war, but for integrity. Curtis accepted it with a slight nod. Then, with the strength of a man half his age, he turned to the rows of cadets in formation and raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute. They returned it, every one of them, crisp, sharp, unified. A man once dismissed as invisible had become impossible to ignore. And as Curtis Rafford lowered his hand, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "I didn't fight for medals. I fought for moments like this." The wind picked up, rustling the flags, and somewhere far beyond the ceremony, a generation stood taller because one man had refused to shrink. 6 months later, Officer Jason Myers was sentenced to 15 years for fraud, theft, and abuse of power. The scam ring was dismantled completely, with over 40 arrests across 12 states. Veterans Affairs underwent its most comprehensive reform in decades, with new safeguards specifically designed to protect the elderly and vulnerable. Curtis's apartment building was renovated through a nonprofit veterans housing initiative. He now had a working heating system, new windows, and a small garden on the roof where he met with other veterans every Tuesday. But perhaps the most profound change was at Georgia First Bank, where Maya had been promoted to Community Outreach Director. A new sign hung in the lobby, Veterans Priority Service. Beneath it, a small replica of Curtis's cap in a glass case. And every time a veteran approached the tellers, they were greeted by name and offered a seat, not out of obligation, but out of the understanding that dignity is not something earned. It is something recognized. Curtis never sought fame. He never asked for special treatment. In fact, as the spotlight faded and life returned to a new normal, he was content to return to his quiet routines: morning coffee, afternoon walks, evening news. But now, when he walked those 5 blocks to the corner store, strangers sometimes nodded in recognition. Not because he was a living monument, but because they had learned to see beyond age, beyond worn coats and weathered hands, to the humanity beneath. And that, Curtis thought as he watched a young cadet practice salutes in the park across from his apartment, was a victory worth the fight. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.